Hey guys, I'm Jackie, Senior Tutor at Prepped and Polished, and today is segment 8 of Grammar Rules That You Must Know. In today's segment, we're going to be going over the different types of academic writing. We briefly touched on these in a previous session, so all I did was talk about just so briefly what the types of academic writing are. It's not going to be comprehensive, guys, so we're not going to get into creative writing or every type of writing, but today we're going to talk about the core types of academic writing. Included in this, we're going to go over their specific features. So what do these kind of writings entail? Their language and what is their function? What is their primary purpose of each of them? We're going to answer questions like, what are the types of academic discourse? How do they sound specifically? And what do they do? Okay, so if you're ready, let's go ahead and get started. All right, guys, so as mentioned, today we're going to be going over the types of academic writing. Okay, so before we get started, I do want to talk about why it would be important to learn about this. So you might be thinking, I've heard about the different types of academic writing, or I've done some of them. Why would we spend a segment talking about what they are? Okay, so the first piece, guys, to this is strong writing starts with knowing its purpose. Okay, so in other words, you wouldn't say start cooking a meal before you get the ingredient list or you have a recipe set up. Okay, so think of this as a part of the process for planning good writing. Okay, so in other words, without knowing what type of writing the assignment requires, okay, you're already starting off on not a level footing. You want to know exactly what your writing should be doing in order to plan it and structure it most effectively. Okay, so step one, right, is organization. Okay, so in order to outline and determine how to best organize the information, right, that you're going to put in your writing, right, to begin this component of the writing process, you need to know what the task requires. What kind of writing am I doing? Okay, so you don't want to skip right to the writing task. If that's something you guys do, so you kind of read an assignment, you go ahead and start writing without the planning phase. Okay, this is going to be like, right, without that recipe. Okay, instead of an easy, right, meal plan, like think Rachel Ray 30-minute meal, you're going to be throwing yourself into Chopped, kind of a free-for-all. Okay, so it'll be a lot more difficult to plan organized writing if you don't know what type of writing you're doing in advance. Okay, this goes along with, in the organization piece, clarity. Okay, so when you think about assignment in advance, okay, and you understand the type of writing it will require before beginning, your writing's a lot more likely to be focused. Okay, it's going to be clearer because the main purpose will be clear to the reader because the purpose of the writing is clear to you. Okay, and then last but not least, guys, goal-oriented writing. Okay, so these are all up the same alley. They all have to do with planning well and knowing the function of your writing. Okay, but knowing the type of writing a task requires, okay, is synonymous or at least a really necessary component of understanding the writing's objective. In other words, you can't have a strong goal for your writing. Okay, I really want the writing to do this without being sure what kind of writing you need to do. Okay, so the reason we're going to be going over these types of writing today, there's going to be 3 major types we look at, is because it will help you plan, structure, and outline your writing in advance if you have an idea of how the type of writing should sound, be organized, and what its goal and purpose is. Okay, so now that we have an idea of why we're going over this, let's get into the actual types of writing, guys. And we're going to start, I think, on the most basic type of writing, and then we're going to shift, go level by level into more complex types of writing. So the first type of writing we're going to cover is expository, right? Or this can also be called descriptive writing. Well, this could fall into creative writing. We're going to look at it just in terms of how it would function in a formal academic piece. So, of course, descriptive writing is a component of creative writing, but we're going to look at it as setting up an expository essay. Okay, so expository writing, this tends to be the first kind of writing you learn to do. It's a foundational skill that's necessary to build on and then do the other types of writing that we're going to cover today. All right, so first we're going to look at what it is. Okay, so its major function or purpose, guys, is just to provide facts or information. Okay, so you're either describing or informing an audience about a specific topic. Okay. Right, so it's informative, that's the key piece. So examples of this type of writing, guys, of course it's more comprehensive than this, there are more examples, okay, but for the most part, these are the type of assignments you'd be given in school that you would need to do expository writing for. Okay, so first, a summary of an article, a book, or historical event. Okay, so this should definitely sound familiar to the majority of our viewers. I'm sure you guys have written a piece like this before, where you had to summarize the events of something, summarize a book you read for school to inform the teacher or classroom about the book or historical event. Okay, so the goal of this kind of writing or an essay like that would be to inform the reader of a topic. Okay, a report on the results of someone else's experiment. Okay, so this would not have any evaluation of the experiment. It would simply be a report of, okay, or a news report on an event, okay? So think about the tone a news report takes, guys. This should sound, right, fairly formal and neutral, okay? Of course, there are op-ed pieces that include opinions, but we're talking about simply an informative news article, right, that explained an important current event. Okay, and then so you have an idea, another important thing we're going to cover today, guys, is how to recognize it. Okay, so now we know, all right, this is what the goal of expository writing is. We're also going to look at keywords that might be included in an assignment. Okay, so if you get a writing task at school that asks you to identify, report, record, summarize, or define. These are just a few of the keywords that might be in your writing prompt. Okay, this is likely going to be an expository writing task. Okay, in other words, you're going to be telling the audience about a specific topic. All right, guys, so now that we know the function and we've seen a couple examples, what I want to do is look at the key features. So what really makes up expository writing? What should it sound like? And how should it be organized? All right, guys, so the first thing we're going to look at is tone, right? How should this kind of writing sound? And how should it be set up? Okay, so impersonal. This goes along with a newspaper article, right? So it should be, it should not include your personal opinions. You're not reflecting or evaluating, you're only telling. So this is also what makes it one of the more basic or foundational types of writing, is instead of reflection or including your own opinion and thoughts on something, you're just retelling and summarizing, okay? But it does require you to be able to paraphrase and put things in your own language, take information, take facts, say, about a historical event, and then write about them in your own writing, in your own style. Okay. Neutral, right? This is one of the most important aspects of expository writing when you're doing it for a formal academic essay. So that would be one of the examples we looked at, a report, a book report, a summary. Okay, this should be neutral. You're not expressing your opinion, you're not evaluating, and you're not making comparisons. Okay, so right now you're just summarizing, explaining, and defining. Right, it's formal, guys. So even though this is a foundational type of writing, it's fairly basic and required for other styles of writing, it is still formal. In other words, in any type of academic writing, except if you're doing creative writing, maybe that involves dialogue or lingo, you want to avoid casual language almost always. The key reason for that, guys, is not that it doesn't express the ideas well, okay? So in a conversation, of course, you could pretty easily express ideas, and it might be more casual than written language, okay? But that is, of course, because when you write something, you have the opportunity to reread it, go back, and change it, okay? So your writing should reflect that. It should reflect careful thought and revision. Okay, so it should not involve casual language. Okay, that's kind of true for any kind of academic writing. All right, style. Okay, so this goes along with tone, but this is also going to be about how you structure the essay, how you put the information together. Okay, of course this varies, but there are going to be some key features that are almost always true for expository writing. Okay, so clarity is one of the most important components of expository writing because your goal is to impart information. If it's not clear, if it's difficult to understand, if it's confusing, okay, the goal of the writing is going to be obscured. So if your main purpose of writing something is to explain something to someone or tell them, inform them about it, you want to absolutely make sure the writing is clear, it's sensible, and it's easy to read and understand. Okay, so that should be one of your primary functions of this writing. You want to absolutely make sure it's clear. So when you're editing expository writing, you want to remove confusing or wordy phrases. Okay, and you also want to make sure it's structured well. Okay, so it's organized in advance. All your writing, again, academically should be similar to being formal. Okay, but it's really important to have the information organized well in explanatory writing, because how it's organized, right, and the efficacy with which it's organized, so how well do you do it, is going to kind of directly impact how clear and well the topic is explained. Okay, so going along with well organized, guys, structured. It should be very structured. Should be clear what kind of structure the writing has. So if you're summarizing, say, a timeline of historical events, the writing should absolutely be structured chronologically. You shouldn't kind of jump in between time periods, right? So determine in advance how to best structure and organize the information so that it's easiest to understand, right? So that you prioritize clarity. Okay, and then last but not least, guys, the function. What is it for? What does it do? Okay, so always remember the main purpose of the writing. As you write, what you can ask is, does this inform? Does this provide facts? Does it define or explain? Okay, so each paragraph you want to read and say, did I meet all those purposes? Okay, is there anything that are stymieing their purpose? Is there anything that's making it not clear? Is there anything that's making the writing difficult to understand that would impede on your ability to clearly explain or inform an audience of a topic? All right, so these are some general features of expository writing, and you want to keep these in mind as you both plan and develop a writing piece that's main goal is to explain or inform. Okay, so last but not least, guys, we're going to look at an actual example of expository writing. This is probably too large a scope for the amount of words I use, so I wrote this up. It's just a brief history of Boston, so I understand the scope's a little big for an example like this, but I just wanted something that was obviously neutral and informative. Okay, so we're going to look at the example and then kind of look at how some of those key features we discussed come up in the example. All right, so we select our topic in advance. That's always one step. And then our topic is something we're informing the audience about. Okay, so we're not putting in our opinion here. And I'll kind of explain how you could. So you could involve an opinion, develop an argument, create a thesis that involves some of these facts or the history of Boston. But this is only expository. It's just explaining and imparting information. Okay, so we're going to read through this and look at some of the key features. Okay, so Boston was founded in 1630 by Puritan colonists after an expedition led by John Winthrop. Okay, so right now, guys, it's simply informative. We haven't imparted any opinions. The city was initially named Tremontaine after the three mountains visible from the settlement, but was later changed to Boston. As the city of Boston prospered, tensions grew between colonists and the British monarchy, leading to the Boston Tea Party and the start of the American Revolution. Okay, so as you can tell, guys, it's a neutral tone. As I read this, it should sound at least a similar register, about the same formality as a history textbook you might read for school. Okay. So it might not be as lively and rich as, say, opinion-based writing or creative writing, but that's because its function isn't necessarily to excite or entertain, it's to inform. Okay. The city saw many historical events thereafter: the Great Fire of 1872, the busing crisis of 1974, the Big Dig in the early 2000s. Boston's rich culture and history, a result of its age. Boston was the seventh city founded in the United States. Okay, so while we did provide some kind of explanation here, their rich culture and history are a result of how old it is, this is still a neutral statement, guys. So no one, in other words, would argue against the fact that Boston is one of the oldest cities in the United States, and because of that, it has a rich history. Okay, so we haven't actually put in any opinions or evaluations. Okay, so to shift this, or what would make it no longer expository writing, or would push it into a different type of writing, like analytical or persuasive, right, would be some kind of opinion here, right? Boston is the most historically important and culturally relevant city in the United States. This is an evaluation because many people might disagree. They might say another city is New York or LA or something like that. Okay, so we want to make sure that if you're doing expository writing, you know in advance, you want to set your writing up so that the goal is clear, your writing stays neutral, and you're not imparting an opinion or an evaluation of something. All right, guys, so that's expository writing, and the next piece we're going to look at, the next type of writing, is going to build off that. Okay, so the next piece of writing we're going to look at is analytical writing. This is the one we talked about in a little more detail in a previous session, okay, and this is probably going to be one of the most common types of writing you do for academics, especially as you guys get into middle school, late middle school, and high school. Okay, so this is going to be one of the most important types of writing you do academically. Okay. So analytical writing includes descriptive writing. They're not completely separate. Instead, the writing styles we're going to look at kind of build off one another, okay? So in other words, this will have all the components of expository writing. It will explain and it'll inform, okay? But it also moves beyond a neutral retelling of events or facts, okay? In other words, right, it requires you to analyze, right, one or more components of a historical event, cultural phenomenon, literary or artistic work. Okay, so I know this is vague, guys. That's why we are going to look at all the features. Okay, so analysis, as opposed to a neutral expository essay, is going to require you to draw connections between the information, group information in meaningful categories, make assertions about the topic, okay, and show relationships. So this kind of moves one step beyond descriptive writing, okay? It requires you to draw conclusions and do a little bit more critical thinking, okay? So there's our guy thinking, he's doing analysis, okay? All right, so examples of this, if you get assignments in school, okay, comparing similarities between myths in various cultures, okay, so the comparison aspect as opposed to listing types of myths in various cultures would be expository. Comparing similarities, right, pointing out this aspect of different cultures and analyzing them is what makes the writing shift into analysis, okay. Examining the contributing factors of a social practice, okay, so expository writing would likely just examine or explain the social practice. Here you're going to examine, why do people do it? What contributes to the social practice? What pushes it forward? Okay, the reason this is analysis is because someone could argue against it, right? That's not why people do this social practice. This is. Okay, so in other words, it requires you to develop an argument. right? Or analyze the relationship between a story's theme and its imagery. Okay, so this might be one for your English class, right? As opposed to describing a story's theme, saying what it is, right? You're showing how the imagery, right, some of those literary devices in the text inform or emphasize or speak to the story's theme. Okay, so this type of writing is a little bit more difficult. Okay, the tasks will ask you to, okay, so some of the key words, how do I know if it's an analytical writing task? Might ask you to analyze, compare or contrast, relate or examine. Okay, so these keywords are going to get more important as we differentiate between these kind of upper level styles of writing. Okay. All right, so now let's look at an example, or key features, sorry guys, of analytical writing. The example will come next. Okay, so first here, what does it require? In other words, we're going to look at what separates it from expository writing. What's the next step that makes this writing more complex and more difficult? Okay, so a thesis. This is absent in expository writing. There's no thesis or claim that could be argued for or against. Okay. Research. So expository writing also requires research, but this specifically to back up a thesis. So it requires research in order to cite evidence to help prove the thesis, whatever argument the paper is developing. Right, the style of analytical writing, okay, so again, remember that it takes on all the features almost of expository writing, except it involves a thesis and an argument, okay, so the style is still formal, it's still informative, okay, but it tends to be much more specific than expository writing. It's going to point out some piece or specific component of something, okay. A unique insight. So while this might not include an opinion, right, your specific opinion stated, so this type of writing will likely not use personal pronouns. I believe, right, that the imagery in Shakespeare's play helps reflect its theme. Okay, that's not how we'd phrase this kind of writing, but it is a unique insight. In other words, it's not something the general public would point out about this topic. Okay, so it should be unique to you. And it has a part to whole relationship. This goes along with it being specific, guys. So when you're doing analytical writing or some kind of analysis, you're analyzing a or multiple parts, multiple components of a topic, okay, and seeing how examining those parts inform you about the whole. So for example, guys, the example we were just talking about, how examining just imagery in relation to this little theme helps your understanding of the entire play. Okay? So they're often a part to whole relationship. Examine, analyze some specific aspect, which will enlighten you about the whole. Okay. And then its function. So the part to whole relationship is certainly going to reflect on its function, reveal relationships, right, between aspects or between entire concepts. Making connections, right? So connecting or linking information that might not previously have been connected. So we looked at that possibility of comparing similarities in cultural myths, right? So making connections, like these things are the same even though they're in separate cultures. Okay, and deepen understanding. This is probably the most comprehensive function of analytical writing, that your purpose is not just to analyze, right? So you don't want to look deeply at the imagery in Shakespeare's play without some connection or broader understanding of the play. Okay, so when you analyze one or more components of something, you want it to then speak to, reflect on, inform about the whole. Okay, so looking at this specific component and analyzing it will help deepen our understanding of the entire topic. All right, guys, so as opposed to a longer example like we did with the expository, we're just going to look at what would qualify as analytical writing and what wouldn't. So you can just see it side by side and get really a clear idea of what's added to analytical writing that's not present in expository writing. Okay, so we're going to start with the neutral, the not analytical or expository version. Okay, so this, guys, is just going to inform us, right? No opinion, no evaluation. During the First World War, women filled factory and agricultural jobs on the home front. After the war, they made up a larger portion of the American workforce. In 1920, women were granted the right to vote. Okay, so this would be a kind of a brief summary of very brief summary, guys, of women during the First World War. Right? It's not analysis, but if you look, it's close to linking. So if you're thinking, man, I have these facts, how do I shift it into analysis? Okay, we're going to look at the same kind of pieces of information, but they're put together in a way that would qualify as analysis. Okay, after filling vacancies in the U.S. workforce during World War I, women gained a more influential role in American society, which directly contributed to the passing of the 19th Amendment in 1920. Okay, so all the same basic facts. Women took jobs during the First World War. They had more jobs after the war. Women were granted the right to vote shortly after World War I. In the second writing, the analytical piece, we make connections between these events, okay? Gained a more influential role in American society. That's an evaluation of the effects of them filling those vacancies during the war, and then which directly contributed to the passing of the 19th Amendment. This is also an analysis because that's something that could technically be argued against. In other words, you're making connections and you're taking this historical event and linking them in a way, right, that helps you have a broader understanding of the progression towards equality for women in the United States. So looking at this one little piece, how they took on more jobs during World War I and what that did for them, and have a better overall understanding of how women's rights and equality has progressed over time. Right, so in other words, guys, first example, simply list information and facts. Okay, the second makes connections between the events and in relation to a broader historical context, right, women's rights. All right, guys, so the third and final piece of writing or type of writing we're going to look at today is persuasive writing, right? This includes all the components of analytical writing. So like the first to the second, this is going to build off of analytical writing. It's another step. Okay, so here you're going to still state a claim and support it with evidence, right? But persuasive writing mandatorily includes your own point of view and opinion. Okay, so in other words, while an analytical thesis requires a statement that's not just a fact, okay, persuasive writing will always involve a personal component, either an opinion or evaluation. Okay, so opinion-based writing separate from analytical writing. Okay, so this has some analysis in it, right? But it is geared towards your point of view. So as opposed to pointing out specific components and reflecting on them, persuasive writing is geared toward a very specific goal, okay, of getting the audience to believe your position, right? So the function of this writing, convince an audience of your position on a topic using logic, reasoning, and evidence. Okay, so this is a fairly vague and broad type of description of persuasive writing. So in other words, I know this encompasses a lot, right? But it will always require these things. You can't just have persuasive writing and say, this is my opinion, without explaining why. So that's the logic. And then evidence. So you want some facts, statistics, or bring in other people's opinions, preferably experts on the subject, to support your opinion. All right, so examples of this, guys, evaluating the ethical question of whether or not animals should be kept in zoos. Okay, so the thesis or topic sentence of this persuasive writing would clearly state your opinion, right? It doesn't necessarily have to say I believe, but they often will, right, that animals should or should not be kept in zoos, and then you're going to talk about the statistic reasons, maybe economic, maybe societal and cultural reasons that you may have or not have, that present in society. Should there be standardized tests, right? So this, of course, requires an opinion. And do the movie adaptations of Harry Potter bring the world to life more than the books? Of course not. That's not really an opinion. But technically, you could write a persuasive essay trying to convince an audience that the Harry Potter books or movies are better than the books somehow. Okay, keywords, guys, for this. So what will the tasks ask you to do? Argue, evaluate. This is a very important one. Discuss. Okay, so I know this is neutral, so this could be for expository writing as well. If it says discuss, it doesn't necessarily mean persuasive writing. Take a position or explain your opinion. Those last two will absolutely be persuasive writing. All right, so let's look at some of the features of this type of writing and see how does it move beyond analytical writing. All right, guys, so first, the tone, okay? It is personal. While we've left neutral. We're not stating things neutrally anymore. We're clearly stating our own opinion or evaluation on something. Okay, so this could be a critique or any kind of evaluation, right? You're also going to express opinions on important things, so things that matter to you. We're going to look at a version of persuasive writing today where the speaker was actually a speech is trying to convince the audience of something that deeply matters to him about preserving national parks. Okay, so personal, opinion-based, right? In other words, it's not entirely factual. You're going to try to back it up with evidence and facts, but always remember that statistics can be used in different ways. You could take the same set of statistics and use it to convince an audience of different things. So using facts and statistics don't mean that it's not still opinion-based. And then it has a critical tone. In other words, guys, you're still following a formal tone. You're not going to say, the Harry Potter films were not as good as the book because I hate Daniel Radcliffe, right? This doesn't have any critical component where you're evaluating the actual quality or efficacy of the films. So when it's opinion-based, right, you're stating something that could be argued against, that people could disagree with, but it still needs to be based in evidence and be backed up, supported with logic and reason. Right, guys, its function, what is it for? Okay, evaluate, right? So this could be even a movie critic, right, explaining why a film was successful or not. Assess, okay, so you might be looking at other people's findings from an experiment and assessing whether or not they're accurate. Okay, shed light on a cause. This is really important, guys. So the example we're going to look at today of persuasive writing, more often than not, people will be trying to convince you of something they care about, an important cause to them, and trying to persuade you it matters, okay? Or they very well might be advertising, promoting something. This style, guys, it adapts for the audience. There is no specific style of persuasive writing. In other words, if you want to persuade, say, parents to buy an educational tool for their child, you're going to use a lot of emotional persuasion, right? Pleas to emotion, because that's going to affect parents more, as opposed to maybe a new economic plan that might take on a different type of language for the audience that might be listening to that. Very structured. In other words, guys, a great deal of time is spent considering how to organize the information, in what order they're going to talk about their points, okay, because this can directly affect how convincing the argument is. Okay. And then finally, guys, this one mixes facts and emotions, right? So the piece about, the topic, convincing parents to use an educational tool for their children, right? This is going to combine facts like, children who use this service are 25% more likely, blah, 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 as well as probably some kind of emotional component, right? Pulling on them. Do you want your child to be left behind? Of course not. I have to buy this educational product. Okay, so it's going to use multiple types of writing and thinking, right? Emotional, fact-based, evidence-based, logic-based, in order to convince an audience of the point. Okay, so this combines multiple different styles. All right, guys, so now we're going to look at an example. This is not my writing, this is Jimmy Carter, and unfortunately I had to use a very brief excerpt, so it's not in all its glory, but it should give you an idea of what persuasive writing's function is and how it works. All right, guys, the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge stands alone as America's last truly great wilderness. This magnificent area is as vast as it is wild. From the windswept coastal plain where polar bears and caribou give birth, to the towering Brooks Range where Dall sheep cling to cliffs and wolves howl in the midnight sun. It'll be a grand triumph for America if we can preserve the Arctic refuge in its pure, untrammeled state. To leave this extraordinary land alone would be the greatest gift we could pass on to future generations. Okay, so guys, this is persuasive writing, and obviously we can see it's combining a couple different things. So this is a longer speech. It includes plenty of cited facts, talks about the economic and cultural value of the wildlife refuge. Okay, so it combines with this very poetic, aesthetically pleasing writing. Magnificent area is as vast as it is wild. The windswept coastal plain. This isn't adding information really about the refuge. What it's doing is increasing its value, making it seem important by using a specific language to describe it. Okay, so this type of language you typically wouldn't use, say, in analytical writing, right? This kind of floral, embellished writing. Okay, so the reason it's used here, okay, or the reason that style is so specific in persuasive writing, right, is that it will have a more profound effect if he can make the refuge seem kind of magical and beautiful through the writing. Okay, and then a grand triumph for America, the greatest gift we could pass on to future generations, right? This is a component of emotional pull, right? Do you really want to have this beautiful thing erased for your children and grandchildren? Okay, so the goal and the efficacy level of persuasive writing is affected by its style, how the information is organized. So Jimmy Carter did not start with stats about how much money the refuge brings in or how many visitors annually. Instead, he starts with these beautiful descriptions because he likely thought that would be more persuasive. It would establish its value quicker. So how you organize information as opposed to in an expository or analytical piece, okay, this one, in a persuasive writing, you want to organize the information in a way that will be most effective in proving your point and, in part, creating some kind of emotional pull or using other components to convince the audience. Okay. All right, so let's look at finally, guys, critical writing. So the reason we're looking at this is a part of persuasive writing, right? It's a form of persuasive writing. So we're going to talk about this pretty briefly, right? So this has all the components of persuasive writing, except it requires that you add and evaluate one other point of view aside from your own, okay? So this is the same as persuasive writing, okay, but it takes on one additional step, right? So examples of this: comparing research on a topic and then providing your opinion on it, okay? Evaluating the merits of someone else's argument. So if we went in and looked at that Jimmy Carter speech and talked about the persuasive components, we said it was or wasn't persuasive because that evaluation, that would qualify as critical writing. Provide an alternative opinion on or response to existing research. Okay, so what this does, guys, is as opposed to a kind of standalone opinion piece, Critical writing puts your opinion into the conversation with existing perspectives on a subject, okay? So you have to integrate your own opinion with those already out there. That's why it's one step further than persuasive writing, and it's why it's just a little bit more difficult, okay? These tasks will ask you to critique, debate, evaluate, or agree or disagree, okay? So likely, guys, this would be the more difficult type of writing because it requires all the components of the previous styles we've looked at and keeps adding to them. All right, guys, so we're going to do a quick review of the styles of writing we went over today, okay, and look at just one more time how one leads to the next, how each kind of style builds on the other, okay. So first, expository writing, right? The main objective of this writing is to inform, explain, and define, right? And this takes a neutral, formal tone. Expository writing is a necessary component of analytical writing, okay? So you need to be able to explain with clarity things, facts about a subject, but then you take the information you've looked at and relate it in some kind of meaningful way. So one step further than expository writing. The function of analytical writing is to look at one or more components of a topic in a way that enriches your understanding of or draws conclusions from the topic you're talking about. Okay, so you shouldn't just analyze something, but then use that analysis to further reflect on the topic. And then last but not least, analytical leads to persuasive writing. Persuasive has all the components of analytical writing, right? So it requires expository writing. It requires you to organize information meaningfully and relate it. And then it requires you to input your own opinion into it, okay? And then a form of persuasive writing we briefly discussed at the end, guys, is critical writing, which will include all the components of persuasive writing, but also add on the extra component of utilizing someone else's opinion. So existing research and putting yourself into the conversation as opposed to a standalone. Okay, so I hope, guys, you have a clear idea of what the various types of academic writing are. Of course, not comprehensive, so we didn't go over types of creative writing. We didn't cover every specific type of academic writing, but these are the main categories. And remember what's so important about knowing them, right? What should the style entail? What tone should I have? What kind of features should my writing include? Is if you know the type of writing a task requires, right? Use those keywords, right? Did it say to evaluate? Did it just say to explain? Did it say discuss? Okay, and then you can use that and your knowledge of the writing styles to help you plan, to know precisely what the goal of the writing is and what you want to gear everything toward. Okay, so I really hope that you guys found today beneficial. If you're looking for private lessons, you can always come in and meet with me or one of our excellent tutors. You can reach out to us on any of these platforms. Otherwise, I will see you guys here in 2 weeks, right? We'll be back in 2 weeks for lecture 9 of grammar rules that you must know. It just says Wednesday, June at 12 p.m., right? So pretty good for quarantine schedule. We know it'll be the month of June, guys. But this will be 2 weeks from now. So let me just double check so I can give you guys a formal date as opposed to just June at 12 p.m. All right, guys. So our next lecture will be Wednesday, June 7th. June 10th. Sorry about that, guys. June 10th. So we'll see you then. And if you want any help in the meantime, academically or otherwise, please reach out to us on one of those platforms there. Stay safe, and we'll see you guys in 2 weeks.